Now, the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation has come out in defense of non-profit organizations whom the city of Johannesburg officials and some politicians have essentially blamed for yesterday's Marshalltown building fire tragedy. NGOs have been assisting inhabitants of abandoned buildings against illegal evictions. The Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa is, in particular, has been lambasted for the tragedy. Neeshan Balton is the executive director at the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. He joins us now for a discussion on this. Neeshan, thank you for making time for us. One of the things that have been of great disappointment for many people is the finger pointing we've seen by our public officials and other stakeholders. Government is blaming NGOs. NGOs are blaming government, but ultimately it's government that must take accountability.
Absolutely. And in this case, more so than many others, this is a building owned by the city of Johannesburg. Might have leased it off to the Gauteng province, but ultimately it's the owner of the building. And in this tragedy was very quick to point fingers at SERI and other unnamed NGOs without providing evidence of anything that they have done wrong. And I think this was just blatant falsehoods, was distractions away from, in our view, the city not carrying out its own obligation towards that building and perhaps many others in the city. And it's indicative of just what is happening across the city, the length and breadth of the city.
Mm-hmm. How can we have government work together with the NGOs, Neeshan? I mean, the NGOs are doing an amazing job with ensuring that government does not act willy-nilly and violate people's rights. And that's important work. Because it's not the NGOs that are saying you can't evict people without arranging temporary accommodation for them. It's actually the Constitution. So NGOs can also maybe start working with government. So when they point to the Constitution and say you can't do that, which is great, they're protecting human rights. But we also need harmony between these stakeholders so that they're both solution-orientated. So what do you think needs to be done to have NGOs who can also say, we are going to take you to court if you are not going to respect the Constitution, but also let's explore solutions. These are the resources we have, or here's a place we have that we can try and accommodate these people. Do you get a sense that that's already what's happening between the NGOs that have been involved in this space and the government that has been trying to, evict people from these buildings?
I've just read in a number of the news reports today of the Johannesburg Property Owners Association, their representative being evicted from a meeting of the city of Johannesburg where they were precisely trying to do this, trying to place before the city proposals and recommendations on what needs to be done. I don't think that there's a shortage of ideas and solutions from within civil society for these problems. Civil society, however, doesn't have the regulatory power or the resources or even the control that government has over the environment of the city and buildings that it owns. So in a sense, there's minimal trust. There's a lack of appreciation of good ideas. In many ways, government is unwilling to bring on board civil society as an equal partner, as a contributor towards good ideas, and who could perhaps help with implementation. I think government in many cases, and more so in the city, would prefer civil society organizations to just do relief work rather than to help change policy and deal with the systemic nature of the problem that we face. And in this case is really a problem of social housing and the lack of social housing in the city within a context of an overall housing crisis within the country and more so in the province of Gauteng.
Yeah. Whose responsibility is it to change legislation that frustrates processes when people are in unsafe buildings? Because the state blames legislation as though they don't have the power to amend it.
Now, that's just a cop-out and laziness. But when a city doesn't meet, if you take the city of Joburg, it hasn't met now for 2 or 3 months. And that's the legislative arm of the city. it is their responsibility to look at bylaws, develop bylaws, or change the bylaws. And if it's legislation that's out of the bounds of the city itself, then they have the intergovernmental forums to take up these issues with the province and up to national as well. So I don't accept the argument that they are powerless to change legislation. And if they feel that they are powerless, then they must leave the job and give over to those who could use that power in a more constructive way.
There's also the issue of fire engines. Are they enough? Do they arrive on time when there are emergencies?
They aren't enough. And that's been a particular sore issue in the city. Tenders that went out for replacement of the fire engines, then quibbles about those tenders were put on hold. I'm not sure whether those tenders were ever brought back and whether they've been awarded. I think in general there is a lack of firefighting capacity in the city. Although in this instance, the initial reports I think were wrong and our statement is erroneous as well. It seems as if the firefighters themselves were there within a short space of time. What I don't know is whether the fire engines were there, whether fire hydrants were working. All of those things I think will be uncovered in the days ahead.
All right. Neeshan Balton, thank you so much for making time for us, Executive Director at the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation.